Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox, back again with Nick Gallo for the award-winning Upping Your Game. Welcome back, Nick.
So glad to be here, man. I'm so thrilled that we won yet another award for our collab. This is awesome.
Yep, we were awarded a W3 award yesterday, and I'm sure both Nick and I will have it in studio as quickly as we can get it. So there you go.
It's already in the mail. It's already in the mail.
Me too. All right, so what we wanted to talk about today is chatbots. And this is one of the things that I think, Nick, many companies are starting to experiment with, probably as a first step. When I wrote the book, I saw lots of opportunities for it. In fact, I found that HSBC had been using one for some time when I looked at some case studies. But it's really, even since I wrote the book and even since we started this podcast, the use of bots has really exploded. And I know Ethico has incorporated bots into its offerings. But before we get to what you guys have done for your customers, I wanted to maybe explore companies that would want to put a bot in for an internal reason and how that can be such a powerful tool. And maybe it's low enough hanging fruit that it would be an appropriate first step or first test of AI in an organization. One of the areas that's clearly, I think, ripe for a bot is policy and procedures, or what we used to call FAQs. And if you can have all of your policies and procedures loaded and a bot can scan those and answer them, that can be as efficient a tool for compliance as there is. And maybe start with that, and then how can we build from that?
I think you're right. FAQs were obviously a quote unquote innovation, an attempt to, hey, what are the biggest sort of questions, or what are like the questions most people ask? That still requires you to have that FAQ built appropriately, right? That you're kind of capturing the right questions. And it also requires the person to go to that FAQ and search for their particular question. I think the bot kind of solves a couple of problems. One is that whatever the question is can get answered, okay? And then the second one is this sort of anonymity thing, right? We always want to have an open door policy. We want people to be able to come to us or come to their manager. People, I think, are going to ask questions to a bot that they're not going to ask via email that their name's attached to. I think that's one thing. And I think the other big benefit of a bot is that if somebody goes and asks their manager, you're kind of relying ultimately on the manager to know the policy and know what's actually acceptable. And there's obviously volatility potential in that. So I think it's a massive unlock. And I think kind of the theme throughout this entire series we've been doing is that so many of these technologies or so many of these applications are really at our fingertips, regardless of whether you want to pay a vendor or you want to build it yourself. Like, it's all of this sort of creative potential, or the building blocks for the creation of things like this, has really been democratized, and ultimately the price of it has dropped significantly. I think it's a great place to start for folks to load those policies and procedures in, and you can probably do it with a GPT, honestly. Like, you could load up all that stuff in a GPT that you share across the organization, assuming that you can get comfortable with the privacy settings and so forth. Of course, you can go to a vendor, but if you can't afford a vendor, there's a way to get the outcomes that you're looking for today.
You completely took my thunder away. I was going to come in and say, yes, you can do it. You can call me and I can do it for you. You can do it for yourself. It's called a GPT. But yeah, you stole that thunder. Here's why that was actually a marketing offering I had. But the thing that strikes me, or why it struck me, is can be so powerful. So I was with a major oilfield service company. We had 4 levels of internal policies and procedures. That's before we got to state law, federal law, or international law. And what I found was employees who were really trying to do the right thing were incredibly frustrated, because they would have to sometimes navigate multiple policies based upon a product, a business unit, an area, and then company policy, and then, of course, the code of conduct. And they just quit trying because they couldn't do it. Or they called a legal department and say, what do I do? And if you have a bot with your internal policies and procedures, that can be a frontline defense. And it can be a frontline defense that's quick, efficient. They're not going to call legal. They're not going to call compliance. They are going to get an answer. And because, as you have now told us, we can get a ChatGPT and create a ring fence, a body of data that the bot is only going to look into that body for the answer. So it can be a very powerful, very useful, both for the creator, compliance / legal, and the end user, the employee base. And so that's what I really want people to understand about starting with bots is it's about as low hanging a fruit as you can get. And now that you've taken away all my thunder and told them how to do it at no cost, we can really now, how can we use that most basic type of bot that's on the front line, that's helping the employee, that's taking away as routine work from a compliance department as we could probably collectively think of? How can we start to build either a body of bots, or how can we help people think about an elevation in Maslow's hierarchy of using bots for more sophisticated questions or problems?
So before I get to that question, I just want to acknowledge that I've kind of taken some of my own thunder away. I, of course, would rather people buy it from me or from you or whatever. And I think given that the technology has dropped to, and sort of application has dropped to where it's at, the cost of getting this from somebody else, if you're overloaded, is very palatable. And I think the ROI is very easy to sort of make the case for. So by all means, if you're not an AI nerd and you like what we're talking about, definitely reach out to Tom or me. Tom first, of course. But like, to your point, the fact that we don't have it in place is not an excuse to not pick up these apples that are on. I would say that this is not even low-hanging fruit. These are ripe apples on the orchard floor that we have to pick up. Your question was like, how do we start kind of thinking about what these bots should do and how we can start to create a clustering of bots perhaps to address increasingly more complex things? I think there is a lot of opportunity, and it's very easy with even the publicly available tools that are out there to really, through smart prompting, ensure that there is a certain hierarchy or a certain algorithm of sources to check with respect to certain information that you might get from the person. If I were building a bot sort of from scratch, I'm thinking about this from the perspective of maybe somebody who's standing up a program for the first time and they're really trying to make an impact, and maybe they don't have a lot of resources. So buckle up, because I might be taking some more of our collective thunder here. But I would be thinking through, what are the areas that are most likely going to be that people are going to have questions about. You talked about the oil services, the large oil services company, and they had these 4 different sort of sources. There's some prioritization, or there's some kind of an algorithm that the legal team, if they were presented with a question, would be going through. That legal team or that legal resources wouldn't like haphazardly be checking these 4 different sources. There's some sort of overlying principle or overarching principle that would guide that. That can be sort of quantified and listed out and serve as sort of the foundation for the prioritization algorithm at the end of the day. And I think there's probably, just run through what that kind of a conversation would be like. It would be that legal person who is picking up the phone and answering this employee's question. They probably need a couple of pieces of base information. What business unit are you in? What product are you talking about? What state are you in? A couple of those things can then be sort of guides for how the bot ends up working. To your question about Maslow's hierarchy, again, like, you can build all this stuff into these bots. It's really kind of a function of the prompting. Any of these tools that are being sold in the market, there's just a very elaborate prompt kind of on the back end that's going to guide how the AI applies its sort of brain to whatever specific deterministic problem that there is. And the last thing I'll say on this is there's probably a lot of people that are worried about this hallucination risk. I'm shocked that today I'm still kind of having conversations about hallucination risk. There have been massive advancements that any AI that you're using now probably has little links to where it got the information. And there's also enhancements and improvements to like prompting technology that you can put in guiding sentences in that prompt to make sure it doesn't hallucinate. It's not really, everything's a risk, of course, but it's not a real risk anymore to me. And so to your point, like ring fencing this sort of highly deterministic application of AI to solve a very specific problem really greatly reduces some of these sort of exogenous sort of risks, these what I would call sort of tail risks that might prevent somebody from like really engaging in this technology that can really move the needle for them.
Nick, one of the themes that we have touched on probably in every episode that I didn't write into my book and has not been explicit is meeting your customers where they are. And of course, for the in-house compliance professional, that means employees. And so why or how does a bot or a bot which can answer these questions, really help meet employees, particularly Gen Z or millennials, where they are and how they want to communicate with those above them?
I'm going to let's talk about kind of a caricature. If the only way you could get your question answered, or the only way you could report something, is you have to go through the dark forest and scale a wall and climb to the ivory tower and talk to that compliance officer or talk to that leader, then there's probably not a lot of like knights, like heroes, who are going to be making that kind of a journey. If we can make it, to your point, easy for people to ask those questions, put the information at their fingertips, and really lower the barriers for interaction, there's a lot more guidance that can be provided for a lot less pain. So we're coming out with something, a bot that's attached to the employee portal, so people could just Google Acme Co ethics portal or whatever, and then there's a bot there that's anonymous that they can report something through, that they can do on their phone. They can do it on the toilet if they bring their phone into the bathroom, that can let them ask something anonymously and get the guidance that they need. I think the more complex our businesses get, the more complex our businesses get, the higher the turnover of employees within our business. All these things introduce increased risk. There's so much good intention that goes into the creation of like coherent policies. There's so much effort that goes into compliance people trying to show up as business people and understand the business. And that's sort of feeding into these sort of base components of the program, these base sources of truth or these sources of knowledge for the program that end up kind of collecting dust on the shelf, so to speak, if people are not picking those up and looking at them. So I think democratizing the access to this well-curated knowledge does a lot to ensure that the true circumstances for compliant behavior in the gray that everybody lives in, the complex businesses that people are operating in, is a lot more realizable.
So could you maybe move on to sharing how Ethico has either designed bots or utilized them in actual service offerings, and how they can help your end using customer when it's a customer, not an in-house employee?
Yeah, so we've kind of taken an approach where we only want to build stuff that is actually going to get used. And we're not trying to like jam AI on people who don't want to use it, who don't trust it or whatever. So we've taken a very sort of deterministic approach to bot building. So I talked about the question bot that we're going to be rolling out here in a little bit on the employee portal. That's going to be an employee facing one. Something that we've done for investigators, one of our main pieces of software is an investigation management software. We have put kind of a bot like we're talking about for investigators. So all the policies, all the procedures, all the investigation protocols can be loaded in there. And any investigator, whether they're a new person or they've been here for a while, or they're doing a run-of-the-mill investigation or something that they don't really come across that much, they can ask that bot, what's the appropriate policy here? What's the appropriate procedure? And they can get that information immediately to kind of drive more sort of consistent process adherence and more consistent action. Something that I think a lot of compliance officers struggle with is, how do I prove that my program is effective? You can't prove your program is effective if each of the components of your program are not effective. And I think a big way to prove that is through like consistent process adherence. Are all of our policies being followed? Are all of our investigations treating the same sort of people, whether they're up or down the sort of stakeholder stack, the same way? Are all kind of discrimination and harassment substantiated reports? Are all of those remediated in the same sort of consistent way? When we can make that sort of built into the process, it kind of, again, I'm always talking about de-risking a business or lowering the volatility of a process. When we can build that stuff directly into that process, it helps to, like, by its nature, lower the barriers for that process adherence. So those are a couple of the recent applications that we've built into our software.
So I, in the book, used as an example HSBC, which is, I think, has about 75,000 employees worldwide, and they put in essentially what you described earlier for the internal use of their employees to query policies and procedures. And they work with Google and they work with KPMG. And what they found was, once again, using things that you and I think are, if not low-hanging fruit, actually apples on the ground, they were able to get efficiency gains. They were able to get consistency, one truth for a policy. They got continuous improvement, because remember, this is a large language model. Even if it's your own stuff, even if it's your own data, you can still have a large language model. And they work to have a conversational tone with their bot so that employees would feel more comfortable. And finally, they could scale it from a scale of Tom Fox Law to HSBC. And that's the beauty of it, that it doesn't matter how big your organization is, you can increase efficiency. I'd like to end by maybe highlighting some of the things that strategic lessons I think there are for leveraging chatbots, and then, of course, get your commentary. So I've got 5 points that I raised, and we've touched on these separately. But number one is define your clear use case and boundaries. And we started off by that by saying, create your own chat GPT. That's a clear use case and boundaries. And then 2 is maintain a human touch point. Someone from compliance needs to check in with this. This is not going to replace compliance. It's going to supplement it. Test it rigorously. With any new product, you would test it. Why wouldn't you test an AI or a chatbot? Then integrate it into your daily workflows so employees will use it. And then finally, take the information you get and leverage that data to not only improve the bot, but improve your program. So I went through those pretty quick, but what are your sort of thoughts or comments on that process? And is that realistic for a company to think through?
I think that's exactly the flywheel. I think that's a great set. What problem are we trying to solve? Ring fence that thing. Be very thoughtful about the deterministic angle that this bot might solve. That's first and foremost. That in itself is going to de-risk the application of this technology that I think a lot of people are scared of. Keep that human in the loop. To your point, this is not replacing compliance. This is letting us spend more of our time putting our unique gifts to work, right? That's really what the game is. There was a time where surgeons were doing all the work in the theater to get ready for surgery and then doing all the cleanup. That has been sort of deconstructed, and now the hospital is trying to maximize the amount of time that a surgeon is actually cutting in on somebody. So when we can maximize the application of our unique skill set, that's always better. It's easier to show that value. And then to your point, there is an opportunity to get a lot more data points, to get a lot more learning about how people are interacting in it. What kind of questions are they asking? If you looked at HSBC after that bot was rolled out to everybody, and you compared the number of questions coming into the bot versus the number of questions management was getting prior, it was orders of magnitude higher. So now you have a lot more data points to say, okay, folks need a lot more clarity on this. Oh, we might need another training on this, or, oh, this is a great idea for an initiative or another campaign to address this question or whatever. When we can increase the velocity of the feedback loop and get more data as a part of that feedback loop, I think it gives us higher confidence on the bets that we need to be making with our time. That's what all of this kind of boils down to. The extent that ethics and compliance have struggled to sort of show their value in the organization, then it must entail that they are making some bets with their time that are not really moving the needle and not adding enterprise value in a really clear way. When we can make better bets, it just, by its nature, makes it a lot easier for us to show that value and then ensure that we're not wasting our time on things that are not moving the needle.
So one of my observations about you and your brother, literally since you came into our space, is whereas a lawyer would say, what's the question, what's the data, and what's the answer, move on. You guys say, what's the question, what's the data, what's the answer? Now, how do we use that for continuous improvement? And I saw you do that when you used to post videos of talking to your own employees. You certainly have talked about that over the years on webinars, on the Ethics First, on podcasts with me, about the hotline, speak up, and crowdsourcing information from your own employees. You even use it in the Ethics Burst episodes you do, where you take the information, the questions that are presented, or other topics or other data that comes to you or into the portal you guys use, and you use that for continuous improvement in a wide variety of ways. It's a long-winded way of saying this is a great opportunity for you to get yet another source of data that you wouldn't get and reincorporate that information back into your compliance product.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thanks for saying that. That was thanks for those kind words. Yeah, I just think it's a constant game. We need to be always advancing the ball. It's a game of inches, and the perfection is not attainable, but improvement is always attainable. You know what I mean? And so that just takes a kind of forward pressure to try to advance the front, so to speak, and add more value. There's so much data that the compliance team comes in contact with. There's so many different things that you can start to experiment with. And I think when we can lower the bar on experimentation, we end up kind of raising the bar of performance of our department.
That's a great point. Lowering the bar and cost on experimentation, which allows you to play in a bigger sandbox, but also get a lot more information out of that sandbox.
And it also makes it easier to show up as a business person, right? Like to the extent that like ethics and compliance is spinning its wheels and feeling like it's apart from the business instead of being a part of the business, data gives us an opportunity to validate the bets that we're making and show up like a business person, just like every other department has to do that. Dev has to do that. QA has to do that. Manufacturing has to do that. Sales, marketing, everybody is making bets about the future and they're trying to add more value to the organization. We have a plethora of data available to us, and just kind of looking at it a little bit different or creating circumstances to get more data that we can then use to drive some experimentation forward, it really does kind of start to stack the deck in our favor.
I tried to emphasize in the book that compliance needs to operate at the speed of business, and AI allows it to do so.
Yep.
And I think you've ended this episode with exactly that by the use of chatbots to engage employees in a meaningful way with data that's ring-fenced that you have curated, but you're getting additional information from that you can use to incorporate and move your compliance program even faster.
I love it. I love that. Compliance has to move at the speed of business, and it's on us to put the pedal down, push that pedal down and go faster. Speed is the game right now.
Well, Nick, we're at the end of this episode, but I hope our listeners will join us because we're going to try and wrap it up in our next one.
Awesome. See you then.